Hey guys, I'm T and welcome to the channel. If you're new here, we make trendy and fun crochet tutorials twice a week, and if you haven't already, smash that like button, drop a comment down below, and subscribe to join in on the fun. For today's tutorial, we're keeping it cute with a simple bralette. Bralettes may be my favorite type of make. They're quick, versatile, and when I'm making them, it usually means I got a little bit more time for fun in the sun. Speaking of, if you're interested in makes perfect for sunny weather, you are in the right place. We have hundreds of modern crochet tutorials and patterns, including much sun-ready attire with even more dropping twice weekly, so consider clicking the bell to subscribe and you'll never miss an upload. Also, do me a huge favor and give this video a big thumbs up if you like it, or 2 thumbs down if you don't. Either way, it's a great way to show support so I can keep putting out free tutorials every Wednesday and Sunday. Now it's time to get on the show, so without further ado. For this project, any category 4 yarn will work, but I used a total of 125 grams of yarn, and that's 170 yards if you're stateside, and the individual measurements will be on the screen. As for tools, a 5mm hook, scissors, stitch markers, and a tape measure. There is a written pattern down below. Use offer code TCDDIY for a discount off any $9.99 plus order, and enter this week's pattern giveaway by telling us the last time you left the house. For me, it has actually been quite some time. I haven't left the house in a little bit over a year and a half, I think. Details for the giveaway down below. We're using 4 stitches for this project, and they'll be as follows. Chain, slip stitch, single crochet, half double crochet, and double crochet. This tutorial is made for size small and you can adjust it for your size and explain how to in the video, so let's get started. Getting this bralette started, we're all going to grab our category 4 yarn and make a slip knot. Then we're all going to grab our 5mm hook and start off by making a chain that starts 2 inches underneath our underarm right to underneath our bust, so roughly where an underwire would lay. Now I need roughly 4 inches or 10 centimeters, so I'm going to start by making a chain 15. Now that we have our chain, we're going to get started on our first half double crochet row. Block off that last chain and chain 2. That chain 2 does not count as a stitch, that's our turning chain. Then yarn over, preparing for a half double. Into that chain that we blocked off, or the third chain from our hook, we're going to bring our hook down. Into that chain, yarn over, pull through. Then yarn over, pull through 3. Once more, yarn over, into that following chain, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 3. Continue with 1 half double crochet into every chain, leaving the last one. We've made our way down with our half double crochet row, leaving the last chain. Now we're all going to do an increase into that last chain. So into there, insert with 1 half double, and into that same last chain with a second half double crochet. That is our increase. Our row 1 is complete, so getting started on row 2, chain 1, that's our turning chain, flip our work and put 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. So finding the first stitch from our previous row, we're going to insert into that back loop or the loop that's furthest away from us, then yarn over and gently pull through everything on our hook. We want to make sure that we're not tugging too tightly, otherwise the following row is going to be way too tight to work into. Again, next stitch, insert into that back loop only, yarn over and gently pull through everything. Continue with 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. Our first 2 rows are now complete. For this portion of our underarm, it's going to be a repeat of our 2 previous rows, now all within the back loops. So getting started on our row 3, chain 2 and flip our work. We're going to be putting 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch, leaving the last one. So yarn over, into the last stitch from our previous row, insert into that back loop, pull through 3. Continue with 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch, leaving the last one. We've made our way down with our row 3. Into that last stitch, insert with our increase. So into that back loop, our first back loop half double, into that same back loop with a second back loop half double. Now from here, it is going to be a repeat of our 2 previous rows. So a back loop slip stitch row with no increases and no decreases, and a back loop half double crochet row that ends on an increase until we have a portion that can stretch. And remember, it will have a decent amount of stretch to it from mid-underarm over to the corner of our underarm. I'll meet you back right after a slip stitch row, and then we can finish up our underarm. We are back. The first portion of my underarm is complete. I have a total of 4 rows. My width is roughly 1.5 inches or 4 centimeters. That is unstretched. And now from here, we're going to finish up with the second half of our underarm. So since we should all be along the bottom, chain 2, flip our work. Put 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch, leaving the last one again. We've made our way up with our back loop half doubles. Into that last stitch, we're now going to do an increase of 3 back loop half doubles. So yarn over. Into that last back loop with our first back loop half double, same back loop with our second, same back loop with our third back loop half double crochet. We are going to need to increase into our slip stitch row as well, so we're going to chain 2. That first chain is going to count as a stitch for the following row. That second chain is our turning chain, and we're going to flip our work. Starting with the second chain from our hook, insert into that back loop with a back loop slip stitch, and continue with 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. From here, it's going to be a repeat of our 2 previous rows, so a back loop half that ends on an increase of 3, and a back loop slip that starts with an increase until we now have a portion that can stretch from mid-underarm over to the front of our body, so roughly where a bra strap or a tank top strap would be. But we want to make sure that we're leaving enough space for our top band, so roughly where the inside of a bra strap or a tank top strap would be to give us enough room for our top band. I will meet you guys back right after we finish up a slip stitch row or along the top, then we can get started on the cups together. We are back. The entirety of my underarm is complete. I have a total of 9 rows. My width is roughly 2.5 inches or 6 centimeters unstretched. Now we're all going to get started on our neckline. So our following row is going to be a slip stitch row. So chain 1, flip our work. Now getting started on our first neckline row, we're going to start it with a decrease. So into that first stitch's back loop, pull through. Into that next stitch's back loop, we're going to insert. When we have these 3 loops on our hook, yarn over, gently pull through all 3. Continue with 1 back loop slip stitch into the rest of our stitches. Our back loop slip stitch row is complete. Before we move on, insert a stitch marker into the top of this back loop slip stitch row so we know where the neckline starts and ends. Then chain 2, flip our work, put 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch, leaving the last 2. We've put 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch, leaving the last 2. We're now going to end the row off with a decrease of 2 back loop halves. So yarn over, inserting your hook into that second to last back loop, pull through, last back loop, pull through for 4 loops on our hook, yarn over, pull through all 4. From here, it is going to be a repeat of our 2 previous rows. So a back loop slip stitch row that starts with a decrease of 2, and a back loop half double crochet row that ends on a decrease of 2, until we have a portion that can now stretch from mid-underarm over to the middle of our body. Then I will meet you back right after a half double crochet row. We are back. We have just completed the decrease portion of our neckline. I have a total of 21 rows. My width is roughly 5.5 inches or 14 centimeters unstretched. Now we're all going to do our middle row. That's just going to be a back loop slip stitch row with no increases and no decreases. So chain 1, flip our work. Put 1 back loop slip into every stitch. Then we can get started on the other half of our neckline. So at the end of that row, chain 2, flip our work. Put 1 back loop half into every stitch, leaving the last one, and I'll meet you back. We have just completed our middle row and have gotten started on the first row for the other side of our neckline. Before we move on, we all want to make sure that we're inserting a stitch marker into the top of our middle slip stitch row that we just did so that we know where the middle is. Now we're going to finish off our half double crochet row with an increase of 2 back loop half double crochets. So start with the yarn over, into that stitch's back loop, insert with 2 half doubles. So there's 1, into that same back loop with a second half double crochet. Now, since we are mirroring this side of our neckline, we need to increase into our slip stitch row as well. So that's going to be the same way that we increased into our underarm portion. So we're going to start with a chain 2. That first chain is going to count as a stitch for the following row. Second chain is our turning chain, and flip. Starting with the second chain from our hook, insert into that back loop, yarn over, pull through everything with our first back loop slip stitch, then continue with one back loop slip into the rest of our stitches. From here, we're going to repeat our 2 previous rows. So a back loop half double crochet row that ends on an increase, then a back loop slip stitch row that starts with an increase for the same amount of rows that we have for this first half of our underarm portion, making sure we are not including that middle row. I'll meet you back when we have the same amount of rows completed, and then we can finish up with our underarm. We are back. The entirety of my neckline is complete. I have a total of 34 rows, and my width is roughly 8.5 inches or 22 centimeters unstretched. And right before we get started on the underarm portion, we do want to make sure that we're inserting a stitch marker into the top of our last row, which should have been a back loop slip stitch row for everyone, so that it can match this side over here. Now our following row is going to be a back loop half double crochet row. So chain 2 and flip. Put one back loop half into every stitch, leaving the last 3. We've put one back loop half double crochet into every stitch, leaving the last 3. Now, to mirror this underarm portion on this side, we're going to do a decrease of 3 back loop halves. So yarn over, into that third to last, pull through. Into that second to last, pull through. Into that last, pull through for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 loops on our hook. Yarn over, pull through all 5. Our following row is going to be a slip stitch row that starts with a decrease as well, so chain 1, flip. To do our slip stitch decrease, insert your hook into that first stitch's back loop, pull through, into that next stitch's back loop. When we have these 3 loops, yarn over, pull through all 3, continue with one back loop slip into every stitch. From here, we're going to continue these 2 previous rows. So a back loop half row that ends on a decrease of 3, and then a back loop slip stitch row that starts with a decrease of 2 for the same amount of rows that we had for the second half of this underarm portion that we did together. Once we have that, I'll meet you back to finish up with the rest of our underarm together. We are back. The first half of my underarm is complete. I have a total of 39 rows. My width is now roughly 9.5 inches or 24 centimeters unstretched. Now we're going to finish up with the rest of our underarm. So it's going to start with a back loop slip stitch row with no increases and no decreases. Then at the end of that row, chain 2, flip our work. Put one back loop half into every stitch, leaving the last 2 stitches. Our back loop slip stitch row is complete and back loop half double almost complete. Should have left the last 2 stitches. Now do a decrease of 2 back loop halves. Into that second to last back loop, pull through, last back loop, pull through, yarn over, pull through 4. From here, it's going to be a repeat of our 2 previous rows, so a back loop slip stitch row with no increases and no decreases, and a back loop half double crochet row that ends on a decrease of 2 for the same amount of rows that we did for the first half of our underarm portion. When we have that completed, do not do a chain up of 1 and cut because we can work straight into the prep for the top band together. So we are back. The entirety of my front panel is complete. Now I have a total of 10.5 inches or 27 centimeters unstretched, and now we're going to single crochet across the top, preparing for our top band. So what we're going to do from here is put 2 single crochets into every side half double and 1 single crochet into every side slip stitch row. We are going to need to make sure that each of these sections are in a certain amount of stitches, so let's do that together. So working across the top of our piece, we're all going to start with a chain 1. It's not going to count as a stitch. Then, like I said, start with 2 single crochet into the first side half double crochet row, which is this row right here. Find that top loop and insert with 2 single crochets. So there's 1, don't mind my tail ends, and then into that same top loop, there is 2. Now everyone's next side row should be a side slip stitch row. So we're going to find that top loop and insert with just 1 single crochet. Let's do this again. Everyone's next side row is a side half double, so 2 single crochets into that top loop, there's 1, into the same top loop with a second. Then next side row is a side slip stitch row, so find that top loop and insert with 1 single crochet. We're going to continue doing this, making our way all the way up until we're worked into the side row that's right before our stitch marker stitch. Now that side row should be a side half double crochet row, And from our first single crochet into that last side half double crochet row, we need to make sure we end on an even number of stitches. So if you need to, go ahead and add an extra stitch into that last side row, and then I'll meet you back. We are back and we have worked our way up our underarm portion. Now we should all have an even number of stitches. Now we're going to put one single crochet into that following side row, which is the side row that our stitch marker is in. So find that top loop and insert with just one single crochet. Then insert your stitch marker into the top of that stitch. From here, we're going to continue with 2 single crochets into every side half double, 1 single crochet into every side slip stitch row until we're worked all the way down into the side half double crochet row right before our middle row. Now, from this first single crochet that we're about to do together, down to this last one, so the one right before we worked into our middle row, we should have an odd number of stitches. So just like on this side, add an extra stitch if you guys need to into that last side row. But just to do this first one together, find that next top loop, which is our side half double crochet, and insert with 1, same top loop with a second, and following with 1. Continue this until we reach our middle row. So I've just made my way all the way down to my middle row. As a refresher, from this first single crochet row that we have, that's right next to our stitch marker stitch, we don't want to count that stitch, all the way down to this last one, we should have an odd number of stitches. Now into the top of that middle row, find that top loop and insert with just 1 single crochet, because it should be a side slip stitch row, and insert a stitch marker into the top of that stitch. Now from here, it's going to be a repeat. We're still putting 2 single crochets into every side half double, and 1 single crochet into every side slip. And from this first side row all the way over to this last side row, we should have an odd number of stitches. The same odd number of stitches that we had on this side. Once we reach this side row right here, insert your stitch marker into the top of that stitch, then completing our single crochets, still 2 singles into every side half, 1 single into every side slip, we should have an even number of stitches, just like how we did on this side, the same amount of stitches on this side. So if you guys needed to add an extra stitch here as well. Then once we have all the stitches completed, everything should be mirrored. We're going to do a chain up of 1 and cut. We are back. Our single crochet prep row is complete. I did do a chain up of 1 and cut, and now we're going to do the back panel. Now the back panel is going to be done pretty much the same way as the front panel, but without all the decreases and increase for the neckline portion. And I already have mine completed, so I'm just going to talk you guys through it. We're all going to start by making a chain for the same amount of chains that we made when we got started for our front panel's underarm portion. Do the same amount of rows with the same types of increases. Then we're going to work straight across with our back loop slip and back loop half double crochet rows with no increases and no decreases. We do want to make sure that we're inserting our stitch markers into the same rows that we did for the front panel as well. So right after our underarm should be the first side slip stitch row, all the way across to the last one, and into that middle side row as well. Then once we have that all the way across, we're going to do the same underarm that we did for the front panel, and the single crochet prep row is actually going to be the same as well. So we're going to chain 1. Put 2 single crochets into every side half double, 1 single crochet into every side slip stitch row. It's going to be done exactly the same way as the front panel. So remembering that the underarm portions need to be in an even number of stitches before we insert our stitch marker. So if you guys needed to add an extra stitch on the front panel, you're going to add an extra stitch here. Then from our stitch marker over to our middle stitch marker, this needs to be an odd number of stitches. So if you needed to add an extra stitch in the front panel, you will be adding an extra stitch within the back panel as well. And it's going to be the same on the other side. Then once we have the entirety of that portion completed, do a chain up of 1 and cut, and I'll meet you back to seam it all together. Now once we have both our front and back panel completed, we're ready to seam our sides. So first things first, we're going to place our front panel on top of our back panel, making sure that the ribbing that we have is faced outwards, because this seam is going to be an outside loop slip stitch seam. Then we're going to be inserting our hook into the bottom corner stitch of both the front and the back panel. We're going to insert our yarn onto our hook, pull through, and do a chain up of 1 to secure. Next, we're going to find that next available stitch into the back panel and insert only into that back loop. When we have these 3 loops on our hook, yarn over, pull through all 3. Doing that again. Next stitch into the front panel, insert into that front loop. Next stitch into the back panel, insert into that back loop, pull through all 3, and that is that. We're going to continue doing this, making our way all the way up, and once we reach our side single crochet prep row that we did within the front and the back panel, just put 1 single crochet into the side of that row just to make sure we're not missing out on any stitches. Once we have that, do a chain up of 1 and cut, repeat on the other side, and then I'll meet you back. We are back and we have just completed seaming the sides, and now we're going to get started on our top band. So first things first, we're all going to make sure that our work is flipped right side out, right side up. We're going to be taking a look at the back first, and we're going to insert our hook into our middle stitch marker stitch within the back panel, and we're going to insert our secondary color yarn onto our hook. You're going to pull our yarn through and start with a chain 2. That chain 2 does not count as a stitch, we just need the height. And from here, put 1 half double crochet into every stitch. So starting with the same stitch that a chain 2 is in, because remember that chain 2 doesn't count as a stitch, insert into that same stitch marker stitch with 1 half double crochet. Continue with 1 half double crochet into every stitch until we reach our first corner stitch marker. We've put 1 half double crochet into every stitch. Our following stitch is our stitch marker stitch. So take that stitch marker out for now. Insert 1 half double crochet into the top of that stitch. We are going to insert our stitch marker back into the stitch, but I prefer to insert my stitch marker into the body of the stitch instead of the top, since our ribbing is going to be front post double crochets. From here, put 1 half double crochet into the rest of our stitches until we're worked into the last stitch right before our side seam. We've put 1 half double crochet into every stitch. Now we should have the same amount of stitches that we did when we worked our way up our underarm portion, just as a reference. Once we're worked into that last stitch, before we start working into the first stitch on the other side of our seam, we're going to chain 1. Then into that next stitch on the other side of our seam, insert with our first half double crochet. Continue with 1 half double crochet into every stitch until we're worked into the stitch right before our following stitch marker. Now we've just made our way up to our following stitch marker stitch. As a reference, from this first stitch that we have here, counting all the way down to this last one, including this chain, making sure that we're not counting that stitch marker stitch, we should now have an odd number of stitches. Now from here, we're going to continue doing this, making our way all the way down. So once we're worked into our stitch marker stitches, insert your stitch marker into those stitches. Now you can insert it into the top or into the body, that's completely up to you, just into the body is my preference for this pattern. For working into the neckline within the front panel, 1 half double is going to be worked into every stitch, remembering to insert our stitch markers into the top of those stitches. Now working into our underarm going towards the back, it's going to be done exactly the same way as this one. So 1 half double into every stitch. Once we reach our side seam, chain 1, and then continue on with our half double crochets, and then continue on with our half double crochets to reach the end of the row, and then I'll meet you back. We are back. Our first row for our top band is nearly complete, we just need to connect it. But just as a really quick tip, if your top band is ruffling up just a little bit like this, that's completely fine. It'll all even out when it's worn. But what we're going to do from here is simply slip stitch into that second chain that we made when we started this row. So we start off the row with a chain 2. We're going to count up 1, count up 2, and into that second chain we're going to insert with a slip stitch. And now our row 1 is actually complete. Now we're going to get started on our row 2, which is just going to be a front post double and half double crochet, making our way all the way around. Now we want to make sure that we're working in the same direction that we were working in for the previous row. So we're going to chain 2. We are not going to flip our work, and finding the first half double crochet from our previous row, insert with a front post double. The first half double crochet should be worked into that same stitch that our chain 2 is in. So we're going to yarn over. Into the body of that half double crochet, we're going to insert our hook underneath and through the other side. We're then going to yarn over and pull through, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. That is our first front post double. Then yarn over, into that next stitch, insert with a half double. Pretty simple. Let's do that again. We're going to skip over that following half double crochet from our previous row because that half double crochet that we just did counts as that stitch. So underneath the body of that following half double, we're going to yarn over, insert our hook underneath the body of that stitch and through the other side, yarn over, pull through, then yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, and again yarn over, just into that next stitch, insert with a half double crochet, and that's it. We're going to continue doing this, making our way all the way down. Now just as a really quick tip, each of our stitch marker stitches, since we inserted our stitch markers into the bodies, they should be front post double crochets, and also that chain that we made that's right in the middle of our underarm, we're going to be working into there as well. And if we did our math right, that stitch should be a half double crochet. So just continue to make your way all the way around with our front post double and half double crochets, and I'll meet you back. And we do want to make sure that we're still inserting our stitch markers into the body of the same stitches when we reach all of them. So we are back. We have just completed our row 2, and now we're going to get started on our row 3 together. So how that's going to work is we're basically just going to extend our previous row stitches to get some ribbing. So right after we slip stitch into that second chain, we're going to chain 2, and working in the same direction as our previous row, we are all going to start with a front post double crochet because that's the first stitch that we should all have. So yarn over, into our previous row's front post double, insert with another front post double, then into our following stitch should be a half double crochet. We're going to continue to do this until we reach our stitch marker stitch. So we've made our way across with the first half of our back portion. Now we have reached our stitch marker stitch. Now we're going to do our increase. Now this increase is going to be exactly the same for each of the point stitch marker stitches that we have. So what it's going to be is into our stitch marker stitch, it's going to be a half double, front post double, and then a half double into that same stitch. So yarn over, into that following stitch with a half double. Into our stitch marker stitch, which is our front post double, we're going to do a front post double into there. And don't forget to insert your stitch marker into that stitch because that is the middle now. And then to complete our increase, we're going to half double crochet into the same stitch that our previous half double crochet was worked into because this is our corner increase. So it may be a little bit hard, but go ahead and insert your hook into that same stitch with a half double crochet. And that is that. And from here, we're going to continue to extend our previous row stitches. So everyone's following stitch should be a half double crochet. So just half double crochet into the top of that following stitch. Then everyone's next stitch is a front post double, so put one front post double into there. And from here, we're going to continue doing this, making our way all the way down since we're at our underarm portion. Once we reach this pointed stitch marker stitch, we're going to do the same increase that we just did together. Then continue to extend our previous row stitches until we're worked all the way down into the front post double crochet that we have that's right before our middle front post double crochet. So we are back. We've just made our way down and up our underarm. We did our increase at the top of our cup. Then we made our way back down, extending our previous row stitches. Now we have stopped at the front post double crochet that we have that's right before our middle stitch. And now just to do this middle stitch, all we're going to do is skip over that following half double crochet and then just front post double crochet into that middle stitch. So yarn over. Into our middle stitch marker stitch, we're going to insert with a front post double crochet, and don't forget to insert your stitch marker into the body of that stitch. Then just to get started, we are going to skip the following stitch as well to match this skip over here. So we are not going to do this following half double crochet and into that following front post double, just automatically work into there. And then from here, everything is going to be the same. Continue to extend our previous row stitches. Once we reach our stitch markers, we're going to do the same increases that we've been doing together, and we're just going to make our way all the way up and around, and then I'll meet you back. We are back. Our row 3 is now complete. We have slip stitched into that second chain. From here, we're going to continue to extend our previous row stitches until we get the height of the top band that we'd like. I just want to do the increases and the decrease with you guys just once more. So from where we're at, chain 2. Do not flip your work. We're going to be working in the same direction as our previous row and do our front post double crochets and half double crochets until we reach our increased stitch marker stitch. We've made our way all the way down to our increased stitch marker stitch. Everyone's last stitch should have been a half double crochet, and we should have one half double crochet from our previous row right before our front post from our previous row. All we're going to do is yarn over and into that half double crochet that's nearest to our front post double, we're going to do a front post double crochet into that half double crochet. And now we're going to do our increase, and our increase is always going to be the same. So into the top of that stitch marker stitch, a half double, front post double, insert your stitch marker, and half double crochet all into that middle stitch. So into that following stitch, into the top of it, start with a half double, I'm going to take out my stitch marker and into the post from my previous row. I'm going to insert yet another post and insert my stitch marker into the body of that stitch. Then half double crochet into the same stitch that our previous half double crochet was worked into, because remember, this is still our increase. Then from here, we're going to front post double crochet into that following stitch. So basically, the last stitch that we have on this side is going to be mirrored on this side. So just into that following half double crochet, because we should have two right next to each other. Into that next one, insert with a front post double, then continue on per usual. So into that next stitch, a half double crochet, and we're just going to continue to extend our previous row stitches. Whenever we reach our increased stitch marker stitches, we're going to increase the same way that we just did. So we're going to continue on with this, making our way all the way down until we reach our middle stitch within the front panel, and then I'll meet you back. So we are back. We have made our way all the way down with our front post double and half double crochets until we are one stitch left right before our middle stitch marker. Everyone's last stitch should have been a half double crochet. And all we're going to do is skip that following stitch and then just do our middle stitch, which is always going to be a front post double crochet. And don't forget to insert your stitch marker into the body of that stitch, and then from here we're going to repeat. So since the last stitch on this side was a half double, into the half double from the other side, so we're going to be skipping over that following stitch because that stitch is a front post double, into that next half double, insert with a half double, and from here continue to extend our previous row stitches, continuing to do the same increases that we just did together until we reach the end of the row. We are back. I have just completed my fourth row for my top band, and that is exactly the height that I wanted for my top band, so I did a chain up of one and cut. But if you guys would like for more rows to happen, then you guys can go ahead and just continue on with the rows that we just did previously with each other. But once we have that, we're now going to get started on the bottom band. So first things first, we're going to make sure the work is flipped right side out, right side up. Then we're going to insert our hook into any one of the side rows that we have along the bottom of our piece. I'd like for my bottom band to be with my primary color, so I'm going to insert my primary color yarn onto my hook, pull through, and do a chain up of one to secure. Now all we're going to do is 2 single crochets into every side half double, 1 single crochet into every side slip, and then I'll meet you back. But once when the single crochet row is completed, try your piece on, because this single crochet row is going to be as wide as this portion can stretch. So if it's a little bit too tight, redo some stitches with a loose grip, or if it's too loose, redo some stitches with a tighter grip. We are back. We have just single crocheted along the entirety of the bottom of our piece. Now we're going to get started on the bottom band. So right after we have slip stitched into that chain space, we're now going to make a chain the length that we'd like for the bottom band to be. Now I'd like for my bottom band to be roughly 2 inches or 5 centimeters, so I'm going to start by making a chain 8. Now that we have our chain, we're all going to block off that last chain and do a chain 1. That chain 1 doesn't count as a stitch, that's our turning chain. Then into that chain that we blocked off for the second chain from our hook, insert with a slip stitch. So insert, yarn over, and gently pull through everything on our hook. And from here, continue with 1 slip stitch into every chain. Now that we put 1 slip stitch into every chain, we need to connect it into the base. So just finding that next available stitch into the base, we're going to slip stitch into there to connect, and this slip stitch into the base doesn't actually count as a stitch, that's just to connect. Then we do need to work our way up to the following row, so slip stitch into that following stitch into the base, flip our work, and now we're going to be putting 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. Now since we already know how to do that, just find that first stitch from our previous row and insert into that back loop, but making sure we're not working into any of those slip stitches into the base. So into that first stitch is back loop, pull through everything, and continue with 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. At the end of the row, chain 1, flip our work, and put 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch, and I'll meet you back at the base once more. We are back, and our first 3 rows are nearly complete. We're just going to connect it into the base together once more. So just finding that next available stitch into the base, insert with a slip stitch to connect, and that's it. To work our way up to the following row, simply slip stitch in that next stitch into the base, flip our work, and then put 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch, and that's it. From here, continue to repeat our 2 previous rows with no increases and no decreases until we don't have any more stitches left to work into. When we don't, I'll meet you back so we can seam it all up together. We are back. We've made our way all the way around with our back loop slip stitches for the bottom band. I went ahead and already seamed everything up, but this seam is going to be done exactly the same way as our side seams, so an outside loop slip stitch seam. So just to talk you through it, we're going to make sure that our work is flipped right side out, right side up. Then do our outside loop slip stitch seam until we don't have any more stitches left to work into. Then do a chain up of 1 and cut. So the last thing that we're all going to have to do is our straps. First things first, make sure your work is still flipped right side out, right side up. Insert your hook into any one of the stitches that we have within our underarm portion. I do like to insert my hook into that chain space that we made when we're working on our top band, but you guys don't have to. You can insert your hook into any of them. All we're going to do from here is with our strap color, I do want mine to be my secondary color yarn, is single crochet all the way up until we reach our stitch marker stitch or right where the increase is, and then I'll meet you back. So we've made our way all the way up until we have reached our stitch marker stitch. Now from here, we're all going to make a chain that can reach up and over our shoulder to the other stitch marker stitch that we have for the other panel. I went ahead and already did my chain. I needed roughly 10 inches or 25 centimeters, so I made a chain 40. And once we have our chain, we're just going to single crochet it into the top corner stitch. So making sure that our chain isn't twisted, we're going to find that top corner stitch and insert our hook with a single crochet. That is our connection and also counts as a stitch. And working back down our underarm, 1 single crochet into every stitch, then slip stitch into that chain space, do a chain up 1 cut, and then repeat on the other side. So now that we have just finished up our straps on both sides, the last thing we're going to have to do is just single crochet along everything that we have within the neckline portion just to clean everything up. So just make sure that your work is still flipped right side out, right side up. Insert your hook into any one of the stitches along the back and simply put 1 single crochet into every stitch, 1 single crochet into every chain, and just make your way all the way around. Then slip stitch into that chain space and do a chain up 1 and cut. Alright, so my single crochet row is complete and we are all done. The last thing we're going to have to do is just weave in all of our ends. And there you have it. Hope you all enjoyed the tutorial. Join us on Instagram, Pinterest, or Twitter. Those links are down below. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Catch you on the next one. Bye!